Arcades, they've been gone for a minute, but they were a pretty big deal back in the day. You know, they were what most kids did most of the time for a lot of years, and they were more or less the start of gaming. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, tell its story, talk a little bit about how big of a deal it actually was and the influence that it had on our culture before it all inevitably came to an end. So let's do that. Now, it all started back in 1972 with Pong. Well, it actually started back in the 1600s with this, the super old ass version of Space Cadet Pinball. But I don't think anybody really wants to hear about the gaming habits of this guy, so we're just gonna jump ahead a little bit. Now, Pong got its start back in the big brains of this guy right here, Alan Alcorn. He got hired on by Atari, and they were like, hey, make something. So we made Pong. Bada bing, bada bam. People loved it. They flocked to the bars wherever you could play it, and it started to become pretty dang popular. So before you know it, all these other companies saw what was happening and were like, hey, we like making money too. Started pumping out their own games. Space Invaders, Pac-Man, Frogger, Donkey Kong, some highly influential, massively important, timeless, industry-defining titles that you've probably played on your phone while taking a shit perhaps. But that was just the beginning. Game after game after game, companies were just feeding them out, and kids began to more and more resemble small golem-like creatures as they spent virtually every waking moment of their lives inside dark, smoke-filled rooms, shit-talking each other over Galaxia high scores. It was everywhere. It was everything. It was like heroin sprinkled on meth, rolled into a joint on top of a mountain of coke. Arcades ruled the world. And then the first death came. Yeah, there were a couple of them. You see, companies were flooding the market with so much garbage in the arcades, on the consoles, just hundreds and hundreds of games a year, and like 1 out of 50 of them was actually good. All the while, arcade owners still thought it was profitable and just kept buying up machine after machine after machine, and like, you know, there's only so many quarters to go around, dude. It was not financially viable in the long run. And it led to the video game crash of the 80s. Kind of the full meal deal apocalypse for the video game industry, you know? Most people just thought it was a passing fad and was dead forever, like Pogs or Tamagotchis or Club Penguin. But even before all of that, a greater threat was brewing for many years, chipping away the fabric of the arcade long before the financial situation got that dire. And I'm gonna let you guess what it was. When you see a dark, neon-caked room filled to the brim with children, all shouting and shit-talking each other over the high scores that they achieved while shooting things, what could you possibly imagine happened? Was it A, dangerous roaming gangs of wild children began forming in the nether regions of these havens for violence and questionable ethics? Was it B, a deterioration of the moral fabric of America's youth where children were now driven to murder their parents for quarters just so that they could get their fix? Or was it C, dumb parents with too much time on their hands who assumed it was the other two things? I think you got your answer, man. A tale as old as time, really. A bunch of parents saw a bunch of kids all getting together, having fun, unsupervised, and said, that, let's get rid of that right away. And they worked tirelessly, picketing, yelling, complaining, just being straight up Karens about the whole thing. And before you know it, the added pressure of that on top of the burgeoning financial situation was just a game over for the arcades, my dude. Let's get some F's in the chat and a small prayer to the great neckbeard in the sky. But that wasn't even the end. Oh no, my friend, not even its final form. Because you see, in the 90s, rising like a phoenix from the ashes to once again rot the minds and moralities of the young children across the land of America, my favorite era of video games personally, ya boy was back. Mortal Kombat, Turtles in Time, The Simpsons, Street Fighter 2, as if parents didn't have enough fodder to give themselves aneurysms with before, the arcade saw a reboot, and it was completely founded on beat-em-ups fighting games, and shooters. And this was such a dope time, man. There's so many great things I could say about so many of these games. They were just amazing. And the thing about it as well was that the hardware in the machines at these times was so much better than anything you could actually get on your home consoles. So for instance, Street Fighter 2 came out on the Super Nintendo, which was great, but the true Street Fighter experience was at the arcade. Standing beside your buddy, joystick in hand, 6 buttons. It was just amazing. And a lot of the time companies used it as a testing ground for new games they were going to be dropping on consoles, so you could get a sexy little sneak peek at what was coming your way at home a year in advance. Killer Instinct, for instance, started out in the arcades a year before it came to the N64. Cruis'n USA. There was just an unbelievable number of games that were all way too good to not make you want to leave your house for. NBA Jam, Marvel vs. Capcom, Time Crisis, Tekken, X-Men, the list goes on. But I think the true magic of the arcade was the same as the magic of most things back in those days. It got people out of their houses and it brought us together. It was a place where you could go and share in a hobby, in an experience with other like-minded kids, where you could see the sweat and the terror and the rage in your opponent's eyes as you repeatedly spammed Hadoukens on them until they died and called you a cheap-ass little bitch. A place where you could go and forget yourself, if only just for a little while, with all your buddies beside. It's kind of like the MMO version of Couch Co-op in a way, and it created a whole generation of gamers. I don't think it's too much to say that it created gaming itself. Not in the sense that it held the first video games, as it were, or anything like that, but the fact that it was a place that brought it all together. Before Reddit and the internet, and before YouTube channels and Discord, before Fortnite concerts and Twitch personalities, before any of this had any meaning in our cultural mindscape, the community was forming all the same and holding it together like the glue that it needed in that initial embryonic period. The arcade. So massively important and culturally defining when you think about it. And that's why I think that we gotta pay homage to the dearly departed. I mean, arcades were even mostly too old for me. I remember going to the arcade by my house a couple times and, playing the Simpsons game with some of my buddies, but it was just kind of a shadow of its former self at that point. But thinking back now about the history of this thing at an age where I can actually appreciate it, an era where kids used to just ride their bikes from miles away, all congregating in this one place to just pump quarters into games all day long like a virtual church for the youth of America. It's just such an interesting thing to think about and such an important stepping stone for what we do now. Arcades paved the way, not only for a ton of great games and franchises, companies and developers, memories and good times, but also for the community that we interact with in one way or another every day. And although its time has passed, outgunned by console and PC tech, online play and couch co-op, I think it's something that should never be forgotten. The death of the video arcade. And that's the video, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. I thought it was an interesting topic to cover, and I hope to be covering kind of more interesting topics like this in the future, I guess. Anyways, make sure to subscribe, comment, all that kind of stuff. And I hope to see you on the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Love ya. Bye-bye.